I'll call this public properties meeting to order. We have one item, which is the Spring Grove Cemetery columbarium wall. It's actually our second wall. I know it came through finance, and then we referred it back to, we asked Jansen to take it back and discuss it with the Cemetery Commission. So I think we have some update. I know we have several members of the Cemetery Commission here, I believe, or friends of the cemetery.
Both.
So, Jansen, do you want to start? And Mrs. Merkel, I'm sure maybe we'll have you weigh in too. Or...
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, obviously we're talking about the columbarium. There were a couple things at the Finance Committee meeting that we didn't necessarily go over. The wall was actually part of, it was a gift obviously from the Friends of the Cemetery from Edward Mears in 2004, and then it was completed in 2005. So we have 120 niche, as we previously discussed, which gives us approximately a little shy of $54,000 in the Cemetery Improvement Fund, which is also called the Mausoleum Fund. Of the 120 niche, 9 are unsold, so that gives us an additional $4,500. So our total in the Mausoleum Fund is approximately $58,500. So when you look at the cost to build the new columbarium wall, it's about $60,000 is that architect's estimate, plus their $8,000 fee. So we're short right around $10,000 once we sell the 9 niche that are unsold. So it's not as bad as we initially described, but we do need to make some adjustments. So since the finance meeting, James Hort, the cemetery sexton, contacted a number of cemeteries in our area. That's the one attachment that was included here, the spreadsheet. We reached out to Elyria, Orville, Talmadge, Westlake, Stowe, Wadsworth, City of Greene, Strongsville, and Bath Township. Not all of them had columbarium walls because it is kind of a newer feature to a lot of cemeteries, specifically municipal cemeteries. We surveyed those and found out that there wasn't a whole lot of consistencies with pricing. The structures were vastly different because there were some communities that charged resident and non-resident. They had open and closed fees that were wrapped into their purchasing of the niche. They also had some of them had engraving that was included. So when we looked at them more globally, see where we fit in, our columbarium niche are $950, resident or non-resident, doesn't matter, which is a little unusual because all of our other sections are discounted for city resident. Our open and closed fee was the highest out of all of them, the communities that we surveyed. And kind of what we found, well, I should say James found, was that we were a little bit lower than where we should have been, which we were pretty much aware of. But what was interesting, there are a number of communities that do the tiered system, and one of the problems that we've had with our columbarium wall is that all 3 rows were the same price. So basically we sold the top row, we sold the middle row, and then it's taken a good deal of time to sell the bottom row. So what our recommendation was that we presented to the Cemetery Commission and talked about was increasing the niche prices by about $200 for the bottom row, another $100 for the middle, and another $100 for the top, which would make it $1,150, $1,250, and $1,350. At the same time, our current wall will stay at $950. So you have several tiers there, so we can hopefully sell the remainder on the old wall, and then have price increase incrementally as you go up the wall, to kind of give residents and non-residents a little bit of flexibility. because a lot of times when James sells lots, it does come down to just, a couple $100 as to where they go, what type of stone they're getting. So it would give a couple alternatives to those families that may or may not have, the $1,350 to get in the wall. So if we went with that pricing structure, on option C, which is on the spreadsheet, it would generate approximately, let's take a step back, getting a little bit ahead of myself. You need to look at option A, which is just the price changes without any percentage change to how the cost of the niche are split. So if we solely look at the cost of the niche, increasing those, it'll generate about $79,500 at the completion of selling all the niche. If you take that number, in our master plan, which is, we do have the final copy now.
I do.
Yeah. So we'll be submitting that soon. In our master plan, bear with me while I find that sheet. The Beneke and Associates did a preliminary estimate as to what we should expect to spend on a wall in approximately 2024. Their estimate was $70,000 to $85,000 with increased construction costs, and obviously it depends on the site. So we're a little shy of the high end for that. So when I looked into the operating costs and the amount of work that goes into niche burial, talking with James, as I mentioned, we do have the highest internment fee at $250. A typical internment in the columbarium wall, what we provided as a city is we set up a table with a like a cloth over top of it, as well as chairs for the family. That's something that we purchased about 4 or 5 years ago, because a lot of families were doing columbarium wall burials and not having anything to put the ashes on. So we provide that, and then the only labor that's involved is cleaning out of the niche and taking off the face and then putting it back on. So our staff time is more than covered with that fee. So when we started looking at ways to possibly make up a little bit more money, it was to adjust the percentages specifically in the operating fund is what we recommended, because it was my understanding at the finance meeting that we didn't want to do much with the perpetual care fund, because that was to be used in the future for any other types of improvements that might come up in maintaining the cemetery. So our recommendation in option C is to adjust the operating fund from 17% to 12%, which will increase the mausoleum fund to 58%, and that change would forecast about $87,000 once all the niche are sold, which by the projections of the landscape architect should cover us with approximately $2,000 over what their high-end budget was. We presented this to the Cemetery Commission, and they voted in favor of it. I think that this is a relatively competitive pricing structure, and James and I were talking about it. We're recommending that we don't consider the engraving or including the interments as part of the columbarium wall purchase, because there might come a time where we need to adjust those fees, and if people buy the niche early enough, it might be many years down the road before it gets filled. I don't have anything else to add. I can take questions, but I know Teresa, members of the Cemetery Commission might want to speak, or James.
Yes, one only comment I made, I think all your research and all the data looks great. I think the only comment I would make is I do think that when you look at the way that a lot of the other cities do it, it would be worthwhile considering having a resident, non-resident rate for that, just because, you know, we're subsidizing this city of Medina here, and, you know, that's who it's for. And so it would be worth charging the non-resident more. And that's literally what, you know, almost everybody else does.
Yes.
So however, you know, but, you know, whatever you make that number, it would be worth considering.
Yes.
Yeah, even if it was something nominal.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a huge number, but
Right.
just some percentage.
See, there's a difference.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with Carol.
Yeah, I mean, you could, almost everybody else you look at, it's a different number. In some places, it's huge.
Right.
But almost
Our
everybody
water,
else is.
our water for non-resident is 45% higher. I don't know how that was derived, but that's the percentage used.
Did you talk
And
about that
I can
at?
give you the percentages, we go down and look through our book, and it's 25%, you know, 30%, some places it's 50%.
At the cemetery commission, did you talk about the resident versus non-resident?
We did not.
I mean, I'm in favor of what Harold was suggesting. I just don't want the numbers to change. So if we're going to decrease the non-resident, or the residents by a certain amount, the non-residents would have to be increased at the exact same amount, so we would still
Yeah.
be in the same position that when the wall is needed.
Right.
The only downfall that I see with that is when you get 100 of them bought by city resident, and then you don't get the amount expected for a non-city resident. Because more city residents will buy, because it would be cheaper, and then you get the non-city resident, they don't buy. So therefore, what you expect for the non-city resident fee, even though you increased it, may not be enough to cover the total amount that we need for the next
Oh, I
one.
see what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, James brings up a good point, because we're in the process of opening up an in-ground cremain section at the cemetery. And before this meeting, we got together and I had to figure out how much money, once we sell all those lots, do all the interments, what would the approximate dollar amount be? And there's so many variables when you do resident and non-resident, it's hard to predict and forecast, because you don't know how many resident and non-resident people you're gonna get.
Sure.
So to use this example in our in-ground section on this spreadsheet that's not included, because James and I just worked on it. In our new in-ground cremain section, our range is about $46,000 to $129,000, depending on if you have one or two burials, resident or non-resident, and the open and close fees. So it makes it a little bit complicated, and I can appreciate, you know, the price structure that we have for the in-ground section, but I feel like with the columbarium wall and trying to project and have enough money to build another one to be self-sustaining, I think if we stick with a single
Well,
level,
and
it makes it a
another
lot easier.
avenue that we could maybe look at, and maybe it will run into the same problem, is the opening and closing fees. You know, leave the cost of the niches as you present them now, but maybe make a difference in the opening and closing.
Yeah, that would be something that, you know, would make things a lot easier to do resident and non-resident, because it's all going into the operating. It doesn't mess with our percentages.
It's something that we can at least look at, you know.
What if you were to keep this exact price structure that you've just presented to us, but add $100 for a non-resident? And that way you would ensure that you have the money, and anything else would just be
Above and beyond.
extra. Would it still be
Yeah, we could.
within pricing structure?
That would cover
Competitive.
inflation and some of the other things in the future, right? Because that's a problem that we ran into now, as we were basing on what it was back then, and of course, everything goes up.
Mhm.
So for a regular burial, what's the difference between a resident and non-resident percentage-wise? As far as you said water was 45%
Here.
premium, do you know, what is it for a burial?
It's about $100, depending on the section.
Yeah, it's $100 for non-city resident. It doesn't matter what section, it's $100 difference.
That percentage equals.
Besides the cremains.
He's looking for percentage though, so.
No, that's okay. I mean, I just wondered what, if it was a large percentage. I mean, when you threw out 45% for
That's
water,
our
it's like,
No, you know, John's running that.
but I do like Laura's idea. I guess that would be an easy way to do it, where
It's a
you,
good suggestion.
depends on
You
your
won't have
cash.
problems selling. I'm dealing with Hilliard Rosberg Funeral Home in Wadsworth. They said half of their burials, 50/50 are cremations nowadays. A full casket, traditional cost for a family is $10,000. So a lot of folks are going towards the cremation. In our cemetery, I believe you're seeing a lot more cremations as well.
Don't worry
I'd
about
say we have a funeral expert here too, so.
Well, I was going to ask, because what they're seeing as well, that was one.
Are you seeing that, Harold?
We're talking about 50/50 with respect to cremation versus traditional casket vault burials, is what a funeral parlor in Wadsworth reported today to me.
Is that what they're saying?
50% ends up cremation.
You mean national?
No, for our area.
Locally is what he was referencing.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably about that.
The new master plan, I believe, said at Spring Grove, it's gone up 40% from 1999. So that's huge.
Yeah, we've
And
seen that.
I just want to mention too, with regard to the cost of the new columbarium, the Benke is always high on their estimates. Traditionally, we've used them for years and years and years because they go with the Cleveland, the union people and all that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if this came in less. Jansen, don't you agree? I mean, traditionally, from what we've found with them in the past, so, I mean, I'm not saying it's gonna be, but,
That's an accurate.
It's somewhere in a, 50% or 40, 45, 65, somewhere.
The same funeral parlor I chatted with said that they were involved with Woodlawn niche construction, and they built 74 for $34,000.
yeah.
So that's more in
The
line with
last
what you're
one was-
referencing.
The last one cost Friends $42,500.
And that was in
And-
2005.
And that was in 2005. So, and I could go back and look and see what Benke had estimated for
Right.
that, but I believe we came in much lower. Another thing I was going to mention was that our columbarium is, compared to others in other cities, it's a very high end, if you want to put it that way. I mean, it's around a beautiful lake with a fountain and a park, a garden. So I think that's to consider as well with these prices going up, because it's more than just, some of these places are just big tall walls that are stuck here off to the side. And this is kind of prime. So I think these prices need to, be considered and raised.
And I also would have to say Benke's estimate of needing a third wall in 2024, and that may be very well true if the percentages of cremations keep going up versus the traditional burial. But we've went 13 years now, and we still have 9 niches left.
Right.
So,
Well, and the new master plan too also has estimated that the in-ground burials, Spring Grove has another 100 years.
right.
But they said we are very much lacking with the way the trend is with regard to room for cremains.
Right.
So it's going to just keep.
Well, with the new in-ground cremain section and the new wall, hopefully, we'll
They'll post it about
Yeah,
300
the in-ground
sites.
section.
And folks are putting cremains in the in-ground as well.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know if they know.
close to it.
Out of the 6 communities that we surveyed that have columbarium wall, 4 of them have a different price structure for city resident and non-resident.
Did you say our open and close fee is higher than most right now?
Yes, it's a $250.
For the columbarium wall.
Yeah, for the count. So we would have $250, then if we did the non-resident $350, we're going to
Correct.
be even higher then.
But the only change you would see on the cemetery improvement fund would be on that $100, not on the open and close, because that 100% of that goes into the operating fund.
And when it says 120 times 2 burials per niche, so there could be 2 remains put in each?
Yes.
So you're basing it on if if two people were in there, you're opening it and closing it twice. then.
Yes.
And then tell me a little bit about the engraving. How does that work right now?
So right now, we use Koteki Family Memorials for the engraving. Anytime a niche is sold, we put them in touch with Koteki, and then they work through, they have a number of logos that they can pick from that were predetermined by the Cemetery Commission. If they want to pick a logo that's outside of those choices, they have to submit it to James, and then we review it at the Cemetery Commission, make sure that, it's a symbol that isn't going to offend anybody, and it's a design that is going to work well with sandblasting.
And then the family pays that directly to
Correct.
Koteki. The
Correct.
city's not involved at all then. Teresa, what do you think about that resident versus non-resident for open and closing?
I think it's great, and we were just discussing that we possibly can go through with this option C tonight, if you all are willing, and then bring that before the Cemetery Commission, and then bring it back.
As a
Instead of
separate
holding-
issue.
As a separate
Yeah.
issue, instead of holding things up with this tonight.
Other questions from the committee? John or Paul? Paul?
Just a point of clarification. Jensen, did I hear you say that the current Columbine doesn't, or still have openings in the bottom row?
Yes. that's
Okay, and
nine.
the top two rows are sold out?
Correct.
Okay, and then with your new pricing structure, you're going to charge the most for the bottom row?
No, it'd be the
Okay,
most for the
then
top.
I misheard you. The top row's the most, and then, okay, all right, I just want to make sure I heard you right.
But he did say, Paul, he'd leave, the 9 that are remaining are going to be at $950, so there'd still be one cheaper level even than the new pricing.
Then the newer prices. Okay, all right, thank you.
The reason we were having-
Move them, so, okay.
The reason we had problems with the bottom row is because a lot of people put decorations in front of the wall, and that deterred people from wanting to purchase them. We, a little over a year ago, we made a new rule administratively where the decorations have to be behind the wall, above the wall, so it doesn't block.
You can still see it there.
Does that make any difference in the construction of the new one? Whether the bottom row should be up a little bit, or?
Where the new wall is being constructed, it's gonna act as a retaining wall, and the soil is gonna go back behind it, so we'll still have the exact same area.
But they can place things.
I see what you're saying.
But it would cost more though, too. You're going to increase the
Yeah.
cost of the wall.
It's a lot easier for the staff to keep it, because we have a designated area. It's basically landscaped with pea gravel, so that we don't have to constantly move the decorations around, and it works out really well, and we haven't really had any complaints since we implemented it.
And again, I would just like to compliment James and his staff. The cemetery is always in such beautiful condition, even when the conditions aren't that great for you. But and thanks for all your research there. And to the Cemetery Commission for all the, Friends of the Cemetery for all the dedication that you have.
Yes, I agree with Denny wholeheartedly, and James, thank you. It does look great out there. Thank you. Appreciate the job you do.
So I will.
Wait, John, any questions?
Well, I agree, I think there should be a differential between non-resident and resident, but I don't think we should lower the resident and increase the non-resident proportionally, because then you're not gaining.
Well, I like the idea of at least trying to move forward with option C tonight with a recommendation, and we could move it on to finance, but then that would give Cemetery Commission some time to come back with the open and close for the two choices there.
Leaving the fees for the niche itself unchanged, but with Laura's suggestion, come back to us again with an increase for non-residents for the opening and closing of the niche.
And I think at that point, I'm okay, I'm in favor of it as well, so we probably could take it right to finance when we, as opposed to having two steps in the process, then we could, if we're all okay with that idea of a resident, non-resident fee.
Right. I'm comfortable with that. So I'll make a motion that we accept option C as presented by Jansen, and the increase in the opening and closing of the columbarium wall niches for non-residents.
Subject to review by the cemetery commission.
Correct.
For a second?
A second.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, thank you. Thanks for all the work, and